let's start with, let's just go through part of Pei Zayin, right? Talk a little bit more about Bishul as it comes out here from the Nosei Kalim, and then we'll talk about Isur Hanea. Okay, Siman Pei Zayin. Okay, Be'ezo V'chod Basar B'chalav, Be'ezo Basar Noheg Din Basar B'chalav, V'hech Nikra Bishul. Okay, the Hech Nikra Bishul is the interesting part. All right, so we already saw the Gemara, Dat Rabbi Yishmael, Katuv B'Torah Lo Tafashel Gdi B'chalev Imo Gimel Pa'amim, Echad L'Isur Bishul V'echad L'Isur Achila V'echad L'Isur Hanaa. Okay. V'hotzi Achila B'lshon Bishul Lomar She'eno Asur Min HaTorah Ela Derech Bishul Aval Midrabanan Asur B'chol Inyan. Kol Basar B'chalav She'eno Asur Min HaTorah Mutar B'Hanaa. That not everybody agrees to. Okay, if you take a look at the Taz, where he quotes the Maharshal, he says, the Maharshal said, "Cholek al zeh, usvir lemisvar lahachmir b'hanaa." That means chicken and milk would also be asur b'hanaa if we hold chicken as d'Rabbanan. Okay, chicken and chalav, that is d'Rabbanan. Okay, that has to do with what we'll talk about next week, which is basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan and the whole halacha of waiting. That'll be for next week. Okay, but just coming up now, we're going to go in order of the Shulchan Aruch. Obviously, things come up in a different seder. Okay, so just remember this when you talk when we think about basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan next week. Okay. Okay. Now we have this issue here of derech bishul. So the Nosei Kalim. And specifically in the Pitchei Tshuva, when it says here, Enolok, one second, Seif Gimel, okay, Derech Bishul, in the Pitchei Tshuva, yeah, Ayin Berheitev Ayin Prichadosh Degam Tigun Bechlal Bishul, okay, that comes, by the way. You might mention this thing about the liver, right? You have to see it to believe it. So, listen. It's the very, let me just make sure it's here. That's the very last, oh my, is this it? It's the last thing and pull in. I'll dig it up for you here. It's worthwhile seeing if I can find it for you. Not the Mordechai. What was it? This one, hold on. The case was being mitagain kaved of oath, right? Remember I told you that? Let me just find it. If I find it within a minute, I'll read it to you. Otherwise, we'll just that's nice. Hold on. Alright. If I'm not going to be able to find it, that would be too bad right now. Sorry. Okay, I don't want to spend time digging it up now. Okay, when I find it, I'll send it to you. Okay, so. Not the Rosh Hashanah. No. Okay, so that was the that was the case of the tigun of the kaved oaf, and among the things that he uses is that tigun is not derech bishul. Okay? Now this, whether tigun is derech bishul, means frying, right,
Sorry.
with oil.
Who were you just saying was what?
You remember the case? Oh, all right. The case was as follows. Oh, you weren't here last week. Okay,
Goose liver and milk, I heard it.
you heard it. Okay.
Goose liver and butter.
It was liver and butter, yes. It was liver and butter. Somebody fried liver and butter, and he was matir. Amazing, right? He was matir based on a number of different kulot. What?
Who was it?
I remember that. It's one of the papers with the back of the Gemara. But he quotes it here. You know, it made it into here when he says that tigun. They're referring to that. The tigun bichlal, eino bichlal bishul, right? The Prichal said the dam tigun bichlal bishul. I think it was the Maram. Yeah, the Maram Shif. B'sof HaSefer Shel Chulin. Yeah, all right. It's the Maram Shif. Tzididul lahakel the tigun lo v'havi bichlal bishul ve'eino asur b'hanah. Okay, it's the Maram Shif. Now, so what he used is as follows. That first of all, you're talking about oaf, so that knocks it down to Rabbanon. And second of all, you're talking about tigun, which he said was not derech bishul. And third of all, it was kaved, and he said that kaved is not basar. Okay? Now, whether you consider tigun bichlal bishul, this opens up the question of what about other types of cooking through heat? What about sli? Here's a question that I used to ask on the YU Smicha. I used to ask the YU Smicha guys. Okay, pay attention, right? Because this is a question I used to ask, and I like this question. Is cheeseburgers? Is it midoraisa midrabanan? The bishul, if you eat it, right? So if you say that sli is not derech bishul, so then it's not minat Torah, right? Now, whether it is minat Torah or not could depend on a very simple machloket in Hilchot Shabbat. So the Yerushalmi says, Yerushalmi in Shabbat. Does anybody have the Rambam in the CD-ROM? Does anybody have the Rambam available in Hilchot Shabbat? No? Okay. I'll tell you what he says. In the Yerushalmi in Shabbat, it says, right, the Mishnah says that Opheh, right, the Opheh is the malacha that appears in the Mishnah. Correct? So the Yerushalmi asks, At chami afiyah tolodat lebishul v'at amar hachin. We see, right, that afiyah is a tolada of bishul. Bishul is the av. So why does the Mishnah mention the tolada of ofeh? It should say bishul, because in the Mishkan they were vashel the samimanim to be tzoveach. Right? They weren't mavashel food in the Mishkan. That wasn't the malacha. Okay? So the Yerushalmi asks, bishul is the av and afiyah is the tolada. Okay? So it's mashma from that when you talk about bishul, you mean bishul, the specific type of preparing food, not the broad category of preparing food through heating it. That's like bishul in a general category, but specifically cooking in water, as opposed to tzli or tigun or malicha or tzli kedar. Right? There are other ways of preparing food, right? So the Yerushalmi holds that only bishul's an av, and the other activities of preparing food through heat are toladot. Okay? The Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat in Perek Tet Halacha Aleph.
Can you say where the Yerushalmi is?
Yes, the Yerushalmi in Perek Zayin Klal Gadol. You can't be more specific than that because there are different Hotzat of the Yerushalmi. But in my Hotzat of the Yerushalmi, it's on page Nun Amud Bet. But you might have a different Yerushalmi at home. Okay, so you just know that it's on the Mishnah of Klal Gadol. Okay. The Rambam in Perek Tet in Hilchot Shabbat says that bishul and afiyah, he says kulam me oto inyan hein. That's the language that he uses. When the Rambam uses the language of oto inyan, if you've learned Hilchot Shabbat, he means that it's an av. It's a ko-av. The Rambam has this category of me'ein oto av, as opposed to a tolada. So the Rambam holds that afiyah and bishul and sli, they're all avot. As opposed to what's mashma in the Yerushalmi. Don't say Kalim and the Rambam say that it seems like the Rambam is cholok on the Yerushalmi. Where the Yerushalmi holds that only bishul is the av. Now, what does that have to do with basar b'chalav? Okay? Because if I say that it's in Shabbos, it's all. If I say that the other types of bishul, right, sli, etc., are toladot on Shabbat, only Shabbat has the concept of toladot. I mean, just saying that really sli is not bishul. It's just similar to bishul. And on Shabbos, there's this concept of toladot that you're chayev not only for the av, but you're chayev to what's similar to the av. Right? But it's not the same thing. So that's very nice for Shabbos. But in basar b'chalav, you don't have a concept of toladot. You just have, if it says bishul, and you say that sli is not bishul, so then sli is not derech bishul. Right? But if you say on Shabbat that they're all avot, so you're saying, yes, this is categorized in general. When we talk about bishul, we don't mean bishul in the narrow sense. We mean bishul in the broad sense. So if you say you mean bishul in the broad sense, on Shabbat when you say bishul, you mean it in the broad sense, there's no reason to say that. If any place else in the Torah, when you use the term bishul, unless otherwise defined, like Korban Pesach, when you know that it has to be tzliyesh and not muvushal, but otherwise, bishul means cooking in general. So if that's the case, then it should be derech bishul and basar b'chalav also. So what we have in Shabbat, like what we argue about in Shabbat, whether the other types of cooking are avot or toladot, we have ramifications to what we say about basar b'chalav. In other words, if it's avot in Shabbat, then it should be derech bishul and basar b'chalav. But if it's toladot in Shabbat, then in basar b'chalav it should not be derech bishul.
Do we see the Rambam holding that way?
What?
And in basar b'chalav, do we see the Rambam in?
The Rambam doesn't say what he thinks about the other types.
Fake cases or anything like that, you can't tell.
I don't remember where the Rambam says anything about it. Okay, so it just talks about bishul basar b'chalav in general. It doesn't talk about the other forms. I don't think. Okay, so that's just to understand as an analysis how the two things come together. Okay, that's the Yerushalmi here. Okay, so let's continue. Now here's a question that is actually yeah.
And so how do you think?
And the nafkamina is actually a real nafkamina. It's not just a theoretical
But the
thing.
Shulchan Aruch, etc., we think holds that those things are durabonos, right?
Derech bishul. Let's see. He doesn't say. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say what he thinks about other types. The only thing he does talk about. One second. He talks about mu'ushan in Seif Vav, v'amevushal b'chamei Tveria, ein lokin alav. V'ein mechash bas b'mei chalav. That's a different story. So mu'ushan is smoked, right? So smoking, because you could still say, is different than. I don't think. I'm not even sure if I knew someone that once smoked their fish and had like this smoking thing in their backyard. I'm not sure that it's even the heat that does it when smoking, is it? Does anybody know? When you smoke? You know, Moshe said?
I don't think it is.
It's fine.
It
not the
dries
heat.
it out.
It just dries it out, right? So it's not even through heat. So that's a different story.
So when you say bishul, you mean all the category of cooking through heat.
Right, that's what I said.
As opposed to malicha
Right,
and
right. Obviously, as opposed to malicha.
Malicha, kabush, and
Yeah,
Yerusha.
right. Okay. There is a shita in Shabbos that you hire for bishul, you doing malicha, but it's like an off-the-wall shita.
But chamei taveria should come into the category.
So chamei tveria could be bishul b'chama. Right? Chamei tveria might not be eish. And that could be the issue there. Okay? So you get into the question of microwaves and things like that, and that's very interesting. Right? So for instance, in Shabbos, there's a whole Rav Moshe has a tshuva about microwaves. If I'm not mistaken, he says that he thinks it should be chayiv on Shabbos, because that has to do with what is considered kedarko. The Gemara says that chama, that bishul b'chama is not bishul because it's not derech, because it's not kedarko. You're mevashel be'esh. You're not mevashel in the sun. Right? Even in the Middle East, you're not mevashel in the sun. Okay? So, so his claim is if bishul b'chama would be kedarko, then it would be bishul. So you have basically a microwave, which is the same physically. What being mevashel the chama, it's the microwaves that come from the sun that cause the bishul. So technically speaking, as physics, and I don't know anything about physics, right? It's the same physical process as a microwave, but he says that a microwave is derek bishul. It became derek bishul. People mevashel in a microwave, so it should be awesome. I think you're free, even if you make that determination with regards to Shabbos, you don't have to make the same determination with regards to basar v'chalav, because in Shabbos you have this whole idea of melechet machshevet. So if it's shelo kedarko, you put up it's not melechet machshevet. You don't have that you don't have that in basar v'chalav. This tour that it's not melechet machshevet, right? So you're open. There's no real way to determine. Let's say it's not a good thing to cook basar v'chalav in your microwave, okay? But it does touch the sugya. What's the matter?
No, maybe we could do, chicken and...
We could do chicken, just throw it in. We could do liver and milk in the microwave. Edit it up, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's the issue of Chamei Tveria. Okay. In 3 years from now, when we do Hilchos Shabbos, we can talk about it. Okay. Let's go back here. But it is a very important nafkamina, the other derech darkei bishul. If they create an Isur Hanea, you're not going to eat it because even if it's not derech bishul, it's also midrabanan. Right? But if it's not derech bishul, it means first of all there's no Isur bishul. Because if I ask you, can you take a job at the McDonald's and as work make cheeseburgers? So of course you're not going to eat the cheeseburgers, but can you make them? So if you say it's not derech bishul, so there's no Isur bishul, okay? And can you sell them? All right, you're not if you're the McDonald's owner or stock, right? You're not gonna. So there's an Isur Hanea, but if it's not derech bishul, so there's no Isur Hanea and there's no Isur bishul. Right, so that's an important question. Okay?
One other side of information: there are several ways to make cheeseburger. And
I'm beyond my depth.
This is where my background actually helps.
Don't McDonald's and Burger King have an argument about if they're flame broiled or not?
But that's the hair.
That's not the Holinian. The Holinian is about.
All right, let's do a sadna. So, cheeseburgers, take it away.
So there are those who put it on when it's on the fire. Right?
What do you mean? They put the hamburger on the fire first?
The hamburger's on the fire, and then at the very end, it's mamish roasting on the fire. Then the cheese goes on, and that's tzli mamish, right? And then you put it on a bun. Right?
Okay.
There are many
What's the other way? Is there another way?
Yeah, who put it on right before you serve it.
Because it will melt.
It will melt, and it keeps the grill much cleaner.
Uh-huh.
So it's actually much more common than you would think.
So the first way would definitely be
that's tzli mamish, whatever you go.
But if it's log abaya eish, so then you get into this.
And then that's tigun.
What?
Theoretically, if
so then you get into so it's a davar good. If it's a davar gush and it's a klibishon, there's still bishon.
Tigun with tigun.
Right. No, that's not tigun. That's not tigun. It would still be. That would be tzli.
Wait, what is tigun?
Tigun is frying in oil.
So the skillet has oil on it.
No, I don't.
No, if it's a flame broiled.
I'm saying they're two different. Isn't that the
I don't
whole
think that either
machloket?
would
Flame
be
broiled
honest.
versus
No, they have this little thing that scrapes it off, but there's no oil.
there's no oil.
You guys missed out. I don't know what you did in high school.
Actually,
All right.
if you go to Burger Spot, the guys go take them out and go like that.
Ashrei sui peshay. We don't have to get personal here. Yeah.
The guy does put oil on it.
Maybe there's no
You
focus.
don't need really to put oil
You
on
don't
it.
have to.
Because it's
Okay.
better. It's-
Okay.
Anyway.
Do what you were doing. So the difference would be.
So the difference would be whether you could make it. You certainly can't eat it, right? The question is, could you make it?
I thought you were going to work through the
Oh no! So if it's ala eish, so then that's regular tzli. If it's lo ala eish, then you have to decide whether that's bishul in any case. So suppose you even say if tzli is bishul, would this constitute bishul? If it's like a klisheni already and things like that. But if it's a davar gush, it's still hot from the eish. It could be told us a eish.
But even davar gush, it wasn't in the bishul.
Davar gush comes on Shabbos. I don't know what you would say in basa b'chalav. Another example, right? But it's to. Yeah, that would be. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. The other thing is you do get into a bishul achar bishul question. That would be interesting.
Why?
Because if the meat is cooked already, right? So then afterwards, so you're not cooking the meat and the milk together. The meat is cooked separately, and you could afterwards an interesting way. Maybe you could be making that way. You would have to see, in other words, if the bishul, we talked about bishul achar bishul, if the things were mevushal separately, so joining them together, right, whether that constitutes bishul achar bishul. So we concluded there that in all likelihood you're chayav for that, because you joined it together through heat. The fact that they were independently mevushal is not relevant. So then it wouldn't be relevant. If that's true, then it wouldn't be relevant here either. Okay? All right, let's just continue here. So this was so the next thing actually is something that was bothering Aaron. He says here, what about irui and things like that? One second. Where's that sword? V'cham b'cham below rotev.
Where are you?
I'm in the. This would be really the case of that you just talked about. In Sifkatan Gimel in the Pitchei Tshuva, v'cham b'cham below rotev. That would be the case of putting a slice of cheese on a hot hamburger, right? Okay. Katav. Primigadim b'pticha b'shem harashal delo havi derech bishul u'mutar b'hanea. Okay, so that's one thing. What constitutes derech bishul? Okay. So let's continue here. Right, it was Rabbi Kiva Eger about bishul achar bishul we talked about, right? Remember that? Rabbi Kiva Eger in derech bishul mashma she'im nitbashal b'chalav. Mutar lachzor luvashla, but that was only if it was mevushal together already. Then you can mevashal it again together. But he's in the Chidush Rabbi Kiva Eger at the end of Seif Aleph. He says, "Mashma she'im nitbashla b'chalav, mutar lachzor luvashla." Okay, means if you have bas b'chalav cooked together, there's no issue to cook them again together, right? And I pointed out, but that's not the same thing as having two separate things which are cooked separately and then cooking them together. That would still be awesome. Okay? Okay, let's continue here. Let's see what we have. Gdilav dafka. Duadin shor se v'loshna b'chalav loshna b'chalav ein v'loshna b'chalav acheret ela shediber katuv b'hoveh. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Eino noheg basar behema tahora b'chalav behema tahora. Aval basar tahora im b'chalav tme'ah, right? The chalav of a behema tme'ah. O basar tme'ah b'chalav tahora. Mutarim bibishul ubahanaa. There's no Isur Basa B'chalav there. Ubasar chayav v'of afilu b'chalav tahora mutar bibishul ubahanaa. Okay, see the Mechaber holds that chaya is only midrabanan. I told you that the Rambam, there's a steer in the Rambam. Okay. V'af ba'achila eino asur ela midrabanan. Aval dagim v'chagavim ein behem isur afilu midrabanan. Okay, so we have here also a discussion about what the status of Bas B'chalav and D'Rabbanan is. So we're not going to go into that now, but that's the that's an Osei Kalim. Also, the very important question whether there's Chanan, Chatichanas et Nevila, and Bas B'chalav and D'Rabbanan. Okay, I'm just alluding to the question now. We're going to talk about it more, right? In other words, even if you don't say Chanan b'shar Isurim, right? Is there b'chol zot Chanan in Bas B'chalav and D'Rabbanan? What? Okay. Then there's the v'nagu lasot chalav mishkedim u'manichim ba basar of hoil ve'eno rak midrabano. V'sabehema yesh laniach eitzel hachalav shkedim mishum aret ayin. Okay. Notice you have to. Sure of today. There's no marit ayin in the Isur D'Rabbanan, but if there's basar min haTorah, you have to worry about marit ayin. You have to make sure that it's clear that it's chalav shkedim, it's not regular chalav. Okay. There are those here also. The Taz quotes that even for bas b'chalav and D'Rabbanan, even if it's oaf, you should make a siman. Okay. Asur levashel b'chalav isha mivnei marit ayin. Okay, v'nafal toch tavshil batel ve'eno tzarich shiur. That has to do with the status of chalav isha. We're not, even though we talked a lot about Issa v'heta, we're not going to talk about. There's a famous letter that Rav Kook wrote. It calls the whole question of the Isser of eating human flesh. You familiar with this? Anybody hear this? Because the Gemara. Because chalav aim is mutter, right? And even if when you're older, if you're in chalav aim, you're not over an isur lo ta'aseh. The Gemara says it's an isur d'Rabbanan. It's ki yonek. It says tinok is yonek yud beit chavdal chodesh mikan ve'elach ki yonek sheketz. That's the Gemara in Ketubot. I think it's daf samach in Ketubot. So. From there you see that the chalav itself is not asur as machalot asurot. So, but if a person was asur to eat, then hayotzim and tamei tamei, just like the chalav of a camel is asur, the chalav of a human being should also be asur, except of course for the babies. That's a different story. So, so the whole discussion in the Rishonim in Masechet Ketubot about the status of human flesh. So you might say, what's the nafkamina? There are nafkaminas. The whole thing with when did that plane, the famous plane crash in the Andes? What?
Saw the movie.
You saw the movie. I didn't see the movie. I didn't even know there was a movie. There was a movie. So if you could construct a theoretical halachic situation, if a person is given the choice between eating human flesh or eating, say, nevela, so what should you eat? Right? You know the story? Right. Yeah, so they asked. I remember they asked Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Mital. So they both concluded, of course, that you would eat the nevela, but for very different reasons. Right? Rav Lichtenstein said that you should eat the nevela because it'd be so psychologically damaging to eat the basar adam. So that makes it makes it like pikuach nefesh. So then you can eat the nevela. Right? In other words, fundamentally, if you were enough of an ish halacha, right, then you should eat basar adam. Because basar adam is an isur kal. You don't know what the isur is even. That's machlos rishonim. The Ramban al Torah says it's an isur aseh. Zot hachaya asher tochlu. So from that you say you can't eat anything else. So the Ramban al Torah says it's an isur aseh. Some rishonim say the Ramban actually in Ketubot has this language of lo matzati ba dvar asur, dvar isur. He couldn't say it's mutter. He just said I couldn't find an isur. Not exactly the same thing. Hopefully it's not exactly the same thing. But Rav Mital said that of course you should just eat the nevela because how can you eat a person, right? And Rav Kook uses as an example of the musar tiv'i. The Torah didn't have to aser eating people, because of course it's also to eat people. Right? It's like against the teva ha'adam. I mean, teva ha'adam in some places we know that there's. Anyway, So that calls into question that whole
You were
issue.
telling us
Okay?
about Rav Kook.
What?
You were telling us about Rav Kook.
Yes, that's what Rav Kook said. It's that way he uses this prohibition. He says, of course it's usher to eat human flesh. The Torah never says it's usher to eat human flesh. The Torah doesn't have to say it's usher to eat human flesh. Human beings aren't food. So you just know that. It's like it's musar tiv'i. That's his example of musar tiv'i. Okay? Okay. Let's continue here. What do we have here? So, Seif Vav. I'm skipping the thing about eggs here. Hamu'ushan v'ayavim b'musha b'chamei Tveria. Ein lo kin alav. V'chein mevashel basar b'mei chalav. Mei chalav is when you separate the liquid out of the milk, like the milk, the water. Sometimes it floats on top of the yogurts or the lebens more than the yogurts, right? So that's mei chalav. So that's not chalav. Chalav is only when the liquids are mixed with the solids, right? Okay. O bishel dam b'chalav. Patur, because dam is not basar. Okay. Ve'ein lo kin achilato mishum basar b'chalav. Okay. V'chalav zachar lo mikri chalav klal. We talked about that, right? Witch's milk, they call it. Ve'im nafal letoch deirash basar eno oser. Aval chalav meita umei chalav Asurim hamachal kamo chalav atzma, afilu bebishul yesh le'asor lechatchila. Right, but midrabanan mei chalav. Let's go right to before. 1 second. Right, it's asur midrabanan, but you shouldn't. But it's asur to be mavasha. Okay, that's in terms of. Mei chalav, as well as chalav meita. Chalav meita is milk that comes out of the udder after the behemoth is dead. Right? So that doesn't have a halach of chalav. Because if you shech the cow and there's milk in the udder and the milk comes out, that milk doesn't have a din of chalav. Okay?
That's how we could eat our cheeseburger.
That's how you can eat your cheeseburger. Yeah. Okay. But bi'asur midrabanan. Okay. Now the next halacha is very interesting because here this also touches on Hilchot Shabbat. Yesh omrim the asur lachtot ha'esh tachat kdeira shel oved kochavim. If a guy is cooking, now he might be cooking something kosher, b'mikra, or not basar b'chalav. Lefi shehem mevashlim behem pa'amim chalav, pa'amim basar. V'hamechateh tachat kdeira shelahem bal lidei bishul basar b'chalav. Why is that? Because there's blia of basar b'chalav in their kalim. So when you're cooking the basar b'chalav. That's just as the Shach points out here, it's a chumrah ba'alma because ain't bishlach. Because if it's already basar b'chalav, so there's no bishlach or bishul. Right, but they don't want you. But because there's basar b'chalav there, they don't want you cooking there. Okay. Mordechai Sham katav in the Shach here, Ot Yud Chet, she'asur l'vashel basar isur b'veit Yisrael b'kdeira shel oved kochavim shem yichatei Yisrael. Right. So now, in general, we don't want you cooking. We don't want you cooking treifus, in a sense. So you don't want to cook even. So a non-Jew comes to your house and he has treif food, and he comes with his pot, right? Just like when I was traveling in Scotland, so we had our own little frying pan, and we explained to the bed and breakfast people that we keep kosher. We came with our own pot. So a guy comes to your house and he comes with his own pot. Right? He says, "I just cooked me treif, but I'm cooking in my own pot." Right? So you shouldn't let him do that, right? Because maybe somebody is going to come and stir his treif pot with a kosher spoon. So that's just keeping it away from here. And miu ein bazeh ela chumra ba'alma ve'ein ha'olam nizharim bazeh. Suppose you got to just play it by ear. That's what that means, I think. Okay. But the discussion here is the asur lachatot ba'esh is Rabbi Kiva Eger gets into a discussion of davar she'eino miskaven, which is again a Shabbos discussion, because if you're mechatet tachat ha'esh, suppose there's blias basar and chalav in this kli, but you're mechatet tachat ha'esh because he's cooking, I don't know, vegetable soup. So your kavanah is to cook vegetable soup, not to cook basar b'chalav, right? Or suppose it's chalav and there's basar, tam basar in the kli. You're not kavanah isn't to make basar b'chalav. So he says kashali ha'enam mechavein levashel rak lachtot be'esh. He's even different. Even maybe you just want to kick the fire up. Maybe you want to stay warm or something like that, right? Upsik reisha lo havi the shem lo bishal ovid kachavim b'kdeira basar v'gam chalav. All right, that's not that. Okay, this is very interesting for Shabbos. That's called the suffix psik reisha. We're not getting into the Shabbos now. V'tzarich lomar the besafek the lahaba shem lo yehei naaseh kain v'maaseh shelo. All right, so he gets into a discussion of davar she'eino miskaven and psik reisha here. Okay, to the extent that the question of davar she'eino miskaven, when you talk about it in Shabbos, is a general kol Torah kula question, and not a mlechet machshevet question, which is what you talk about when you learn it in Hilchos Shabbos. Because davar she'eino miskaven does appear in other sugyot outside of Shabbos. I mean, the Gemara talks about davar she'eino miskaven in kilayim and in shatnez. So it's clearly there's some element of davar she'eino mitkaven which is not connected to melechet machshevet. Right, so maybe that's the basis of his discussion here. Okay, I'm just pointing it out to you. It's a very interesting discussion. Ah, excellent question. So from here it seems that he thinks there's a problem, which would be against the Rambam and the Nekuda Nefla, which we'll talk about. Okay? Right, that's a good point. Okay, let's continue here. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, the next thing is the Chalav Nimtza B'Keva. So it has to be Davar HaMa'amid. Bezrat Hashem, that will be the last session we do. Okay? That's the end of the siman here. Okay. All right, so let's go back. And let me just see, before we go on, there's some very interesting things in the Hakdama, the Pri Megadim. Do you guys have a chance to go through it? Did you go through the whole thing? All right, so I'll just point out some interesting points. So a lot of them we've discussed from different angles. Let's just see it here. The question of the Shir Bishul. Remember we talked about that? I'm looking at the original. I don't have the printout. I'm looking at the original here. So I'll just tell you. It's very much towards the beginning. Okay? Shir Bishul Kishir Achila. Okay. He starts off with 3 questions, right? Aleph Bet Gimel, right? And then there's a section. It starts Hanaa, the first section. Yeah. Here it's like 6 lines in. So it could be halfway down the page, maybe.
What words are we looking for?
Shir Bishul, Hinei, Shir Bishul, Kishir Achila. Kamosh Chatav Rambam Sham, Mishi Yivashel Kizayit Mishnehem, Hayalo Kal Bishulo Va'al Achila. Right? That was Machlokas Rav and Levi we saw. Vumigmar Dechul Daf Kuf Chet Amud Bet, and this is a good way to do Chazar on the basic questions. Okay? And that, for us, we use that to try to determine the relationship between the Isur Bishul and the Isur Achila. If you had 2 different Shiurim, so presumably they're 2 different Isurim. For the Bishul, maybe you need Kazait of each, and for Achila, it's enough Kazait Sachakol, right? So the Rambam Pasans, all you need is a Kazait Sachakol. So that joins together the Bishul and the Achila. Okay? V'shir Bishul, so he also discusses the Machloket about Machal Ben Drusai, or Vuvushal Kol Tzarcho. V'shir Bishul lo nitba'er b'Rambam. B'gmar shamamnu be'ez bishul she'acherim ochlim. Remember? Yeah? Are you with me? No? I just skipped like 2-3 lines. Yeah? Be'eza bishul she'acherim ochlin, quote unquote. What is that? Katava pri chadash, kano gimel d'chol shelo, hava kemachal ben drusai, ein isur. That goes pretty far. All the Gemara says, even if it's talking about machal ben drusai, it says that's the sheer bishul min Torah. But they don't say that it's mutter to b'mvasha basa b'chalav if it's not going to be magil machal ben drusai. If it's not magil machal ben drusai, they just say the isur Torah. If you say ein isur, you're telling it's mutter lechatchila. So he's saying more than the Gemara is letting on to. Okay, miuladina. So that's what the Prima Gadim doesn't like that. Ava'er lekaman devadai kol shenafal chatichat basar lekli rishon v'husar miyad. Asur ba'achila v'hanaa. Af deleka shlish bishulo. Ulemalkot itmar de'ein lokeh ela derech bishul. Now, he's saying there's no malchus, but he's saying it is asur ba'achilu b'hanaa. What you would intuitively say if you never learned this, right? If I said to you, let's take the case, right? You have hot milk in a pot, and a piece of meat falls in and you take it out right away. Now I say, can you eat it? Would you eat it? I hope not, right? Some like healthy goal nefesh from macholat asurot, you wouldn't eat it, right? But after you learn the sugya, what would you say? You would say you need kamachal ben drusai. It's not kamachal ben drusai. If it's only kedei klipa, right? How much does it aser? What's the penetration if it falls in and you take it out right away? Kedei klipa, you would say tata gavar, so maybe I'd move, right? But if you take it out right away, you don't have a complete penetration. So why should you? So then it's not derech bishul. It's a kli rishon, even kli rishon shalal gabe ha'esh. He's saying, right? So, but he says no, it's aser, and he says it's aser ba'achilu b'hana. Does that mean he thinks it's aser min Torah? So if you say something's aser b'hana, if that indicates that it's aser min Torah. So you think, I said, then what about derech bishul? It's not derech bishul. This is not machal ben drusai. She says derech bishul is only for malchus. See that? Very big chiddush, right? When we say derech bishul, we think that it's to create basa b'chalav. She says, no, it's basa b'chalav even if it's not derech bishul. That's very strange. I assume he would not say this for convinced. He would not say this if it came to what is it called? Shriya, kavush. We say kavush harei k'mevushal, but it's not derech bishul at all. That doesn't create any isur d'oraisa. There's no isur hana. So but that's not bishul at all. This is bishul, but it's not derech bishul. I don't know conceptually what he's saying, unless you say that he thinks it's asur midrabanan, but it's asur b'achilu b'hana midrabanan.
Why isn't it chatzi shir?
That's a good question. There's a question whether you say b'chlal chatzi shir and bishul, and that has to do with the relationship between bishul and achila, right? If the isur bishul is to create machlot asurot, so it makes sense it would be an isur chatzi shir with regards to bishul also. Okay? If you say that bishul is a separate isur, then you don't know if there's such a thing as a chatzi shir of a ma'isa bishul. Maybe yes, maybe no. But here you're saying it should be a chatzi shir of basa b'chalav. But why? If it's not derech bishul, you don't say, let's take an extreme, right? Suppose you said that tzli is not derech bishul. You wouldn't say it's a chatzi shir, it's just not bishul, right? It's nothing.
All of these times that we've been talking about, all of the times we've been talking about Nasir Rachel, we're only talking about if it got to Machal ben Drusai.
Isn't that?
It wouldn't be Hanan if it didn't get to Machal ben Drusai. If it just was just for a second, then you would have the 5-second rule will apply. The 3-minute rule will apply.
Usually the thing is miyad. That's what they say. Miyad is what they talk about.
Because we talked about tochiv kaf, but there's not enough time to do bishul in that amount of time.
All the examples are if it falls in and then you have to remove it. So presumably people are removing it immediately.
Right. When you discover this, it's like the story when they were in, where is it? in Sefer Ezra when they were Chogeg Chag HaSukkot, and they said they weren't Chogeg Chag HaSukkot like this from the time of David HaMelech? And you say, 1 second, I have to go back and read all of Sefer Shmuel and Malachim again and say they weren't Chogeg Sukkot. You find something out and you have to reinterpret everything?
Right.
Right? It's very funny. So maybe that's why he doesn't want to do that.
It doesn't mesh with everything.
It doesn't mesh.
We learned at all, because Tochev Kaf is definitely not Ben Drusai.
Right. No, you could say that whatever Tam is in the Kaf is Kiben Drusai at that moment. But clearly, let's take a simpler case. That I can argue with you about, even though I understand what you're saying.
That he's talking about. A piece of meat falls in boiling milk and you need to remove it. And then
right.
Right. Who lets it sit there?
So what if you say that's not? So what do you do with that Gemara that says be'eza bishul amru bebishul she'achirim ochlim otam, and we say either machal ben drusai or mavushal kol tzarcho. That's the machloket, right? The most machmir you're going to get is say machal ben drusai.
I would say that's talking about the Isur of transgressing, getting lashes for a bishul.
Oh, okay. So you see what he said.
But the transfer of taste doesn't take.
Right.
It would seem that the transfer of taste is almost immediate, if not.
So that's very interesting. Even though we say that derech bishul asur Torah, and that means kamachal ben drusai, right? You're saying, but it's still an isur Torah if it's not derech bishul. So what's the significance of derech bishul? You just said from Malkot, right? That's exactly what the Prima Gundam says. But it's a big chiddush, because conceptually, when the Gemara says derech bishul asur Torah, it's not making that distinction.
And it's now totally disconnected from machalot asurot in terms of eating, because eating the transfer, we're assuming is
right. In machalot, if you're not talking about basar b'chalav, you have no problem, because there's a transfer of tam, and that just makes it so you don't need derech bishul. If a piece of nevela falls into your cholent, all you need is transfer of tam. It's just in basar b'chalav that you need derech bishul, presumably to have even an isur d'oraita. So he seems to be saying, you can mark this down as a big curiosity. He seems to be saying that that derech bishul is only significant for Malkot, but even if it's not derech bishul, there's still an isur d'oraisa. Okay. Okay, and he quotes Rashi, that Rashi says, Mavusha kol tzarcha. Okay, u'ledina tzarch iyun, aval asarhu ba'achilu b'hana af below shlish bishulo. Kistimata poskim b'chaticha li'ora v'silkuhu miyad v'duchti tuva. Okay? It's all over the place that it's asur. You can't say it's not asur. Yeah? But he's bothered by the same thing. He's saying, you look at the Gemara in Daf Kufchet and you reach one conclusion, but 1 second, we just learned the whole Shulchan Aruch. We learned a lot of Shulchan Aruch now, and this is new to us, right? It was new to him too. Like, what if all the poskim, stimata poskim, then we know that if it even falls in, you take it out, it's asur. And presumably it's asur d'oraisa. Nobody said anything else. All right? So it's funny. All right, v'chatzi shir asur ba'achila. And this is for you. Me'bayali bebishol u'bahana I asur chatzi shir min haTorah. Okay? So that's to do with the sugya of chatzi shir. Okay, I'm avoiding talking about Isser Hanah now, because I'm going to talk about later. All right, talks more about Isser Hanah here. Yeah, he talks more about what's called Adamekele Bala. Right, again, the problem of where we assume that it's Asr, but now we're thinking maybe it's not derech bishul. Right, so you have the section begins with Od Adaber Kimat Rega. See that? Ora deber kimat rega ezo basar bechalav ha'asur ba'achila u'ba'ana'ah min ha'Torah hu derech bishul hamalichu kvisha me'et la'et o bechometz v'tzir kishir she'ir tach d'Rabbanan kodem shebishlo v'cham, right, that's the Rabbanan, right, v'cham l'toch tzonei take something high and put it in the tona that we saw. Remember that? In Psachim and Daf, that was Psachim Daf Ayin Vav. Yeah? So Cham L'toch Tzonein, even though we say Tata Gavar, we say Adameker Le Bola, that the hot heats up the bottom and it causes a minimum bliya, right, of Kedei Klipa. The Nes are Kedei Klipa. Lo Hava Min HaTorah. The Adameker Le Bola, Lo Mevashel. So we talked about that. Whether they were talking about Bishul or they were talking about Bliya. From the fact that there it talks about Korban Pesach, it's Mashu, it's talking about Bishul, the truth is. We talked about that then, right? Because Korban Pesach, he's concerned about Bishul. Yeah? So he's sort of fudging that. Okay? And he talks about Klisheni, you see that? And Irui, all these things. What?
There was a distinction about whether it was Bashel or whether it was Polei to Bliya Kecha.
Right. Only Bishul does Bliya Plita Ke'echad. Right? Remember that? Okay. So he talks about Klisheni, Nami D'Rabbanan, and Irui Mikli Rishon, Shalot Nifsak HaKiluach, K'dei Klipa Hava, K'dei Klipa Hava Safik Isur Torah, Shema Mevashel K'dei Klipa. So we have Machlokas to the Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam about, this is in Shabbos also, right? About Irui Kli Rishon. What? About Irui Kli Rishon, whether it's Mevashel Min HaTorah. Okay? And here he talks about Slish Eitzel Ha'esh, Dat Pri Chadashot Gimel, Dahava Min HaTorah, V'adin Minei Tigun, Min HaTorah, Omna, Minchat Yaakov, etc. Katav Tigun Lo Hava Bichlal Bishul. Okay? V'kach Katav Maram Shif, V'zel Shono, B'chidushav L'chulin, B'sof Kol HaBasar, Kavei Chetigno B'chema, Havi D'Rabbanan. Right, that was the thing. Okay. Now, then he talks about what we talked about in terms of nevela or something which is asur already in the sugya of ein isur chalal isur, which brings us to the nekuda nifla'a. So let's just hold off with that. Here's something very interesting. Hine starts with V'hinei nagach chaticha chama. Here's another surprise. Right, do you have the Dibur Matkil V'hinei? It starts the same way. Nagach chaticha chama, basar legvina chama, hot meat and hot cheese. Okay. Below rotev, l'da'ati hava rak midrabanan. Muteret b'hanaa, they lo have a derech bishul. Okay? V'shu matzati mevuar, b'yam shel Shlomo, etc. Katav af decham b'cham below rotev, lo have min HaTorah, they lo have a derech bishul. Mikom makom midrabanan asur, that's obvious, right? V'im came b'safek yesh lahakel, v'gam ein asur b'hanaa. Okay. So this could be for one of two reasons. What?
This is the cheeseburger, and the cheeseburger is different. This is,
right. It could be that this is the cheeseburger off the fire. Right.
Or even one of them, they're not even both hot.
What?
Cheeseburger off the fire, the cheese is cold.
Right, but you say tatar gavar, so it makes it hot. So it's like, right? But he would say off the fire then, unless you say, look, he's talking. I'm not sure how dry the meat has to be. Like if it's already dried out. Right, could be. I'm not sure if you would consider a hamburger which is sizzling as not having rotev. Okay, I'm not sure.
And then how would you ever have a?
You could have hot meat without rotev. Maybe dry. Maybe it depends how.
Meat is shaman, unless it's really kafush.
What?
Meat is in general shaman, which is like kafush, which is
they assume that meat. There's basar kachush and there's basar shaman. We talk about both ways. There's fatty meat and there's kachush meat. The different cases. I mean, with Shulchan Aruch, I don't know if meat is always shaman.
For us, it's always shaman.
For us, what?
We're not smart enough to distinguish.
Watch out for us now. We're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Beseder. All right, so let's talk about Isur Hanea. Want to take a break for 5 minutes? Yeah? Okay, 5-minute break. We'll start. We'll talk about Isur.
Feels like there's no air in here.
No.
Because there is no air in here.
Can we, like, maybe
Problem is
Shut
that
up.
we know that the air outside is very smoky.
Oh, yeah.
Fire. There's a huge fire in Karen.
You didn't see it?